Go offline. Okay, well, good morning everyone and welcome to this Children and Young People committee meeting, scrutiny meeting this morning on the 20th of January. Croeso i'r cyfarfod plant a pobl ifanc bore yma yn Ionawr. I'm Tudor Thomas and I'm chair of this committee, and obviously I will be chairing the meeting today. If you go to the agenda, item 1, apologies for absence. I'm not aware of any apologies at this moment, unless anybody wants to come in with an apology. Secondly, declarations of interest. I think unless somebody's got a clear declaration of interest now, we'll take it as and when as we go through the agenda items. Item 3, the public open forum. I'm not aware of any member of the public wishing to make an address to this committee this morning. So we'll swiftly move on now then to the main part of the agenda, and we'll go to item 4, and we're going to look at the EAS business plan, and this is to scrutinise the EAS business plan for the 2022 through to 2025, so obviously a 3-year plan. And I'm going to welcome and introduce now Ed Price, who obviously works for EAS and has joined our committee on a number of occasions before. So I'll hand over now then to Ed from EAS. Diolch yn fawr, thank you.
Diolch yn fawr, Councillor Thomas. Thank you. Nice to be back. I know virtually at the moment, but nice to be back with the committee. It's an annual event where we present the EAS business plan, but quite some changes this year to the format. That you've noted already, a 3-year business plan with 1-year updates. We've had this on the item.
Can you put your camera on, Ed, please, because we can't see you at the moment. That's not possible.
My camera is on.
Yeah, so I can see Ed. Yeah.
Oh, right, sorry, it must be an issue on my side. Okay, that's fine. Sorry, carry.
And I'm joined by my director, Geraint Willington, as well. Yesterday, we met with the joint executive group of the EAS, who are key part of our governance group, with Councillor Pavia on that group representing Monmouthshire. One of the suggestions was made, we delivered a PowerPoint to that group. So very late in the process, I've offered a PowerPoint to hopefully make the business plan report more engaging. There is no additional information beyond the report. I'm more than happy to take questions on the report and the actual business plan towards the end as well. So an overview. We've reviewed as an organisation how the business plan is written, and we are trying to make the business plan more accessible to the wider public, wider range of stakeholders than we have before. We've taken advice and guidance, and there were a range in the autumn of consultation visioning sessions to which members, governors, head teachers, other stakeholders across the middle tier in education were invited. We want to feel, as ever, to be held account for the delivery in a changing world in terms of many of the accountability for arrangements from Welsh Government, and we're aware, and you'll be aware from me previously attending this committee, how things have changed. Also, they were changing pre-COVID, but COVID has accelerated some of those changes as well. It's through schools that we work. We work on behalf of the local authority. We're a company, but we're owned wholly by the 5 local authorities through that CAMA, that collaboration and members agreement, to fulfil the local authority statutory function of promoting high standards in schools, where we're very acutely aware that it has to be done through partnership. Now, in terms of how we've looked at the business plan this year, for the first time, we've adopted loosely a theory of change approach, which is explained in the report in the business plan, to help us articulate perhaps in more simplified ways than the past the impact that we want to make. That isn't the impact in terms of raw numbers that we've been able and we've become accustomed to over perhaps a decade or more previously. Important to highlight the connections and actions and behaviours and some of the constraints by other parties as well, and some of the assumptions that we need to make to be successful. However, the fundamentals don't change. It's Welsh Government strategic plans, local authority strategic plans and priorities that drive our reporting principles and governance. It's a consultation process. This is part of the consultation process. We welcome feedback either through the minutes of this meeting or other written feedback as well, which we will look to incorporate with the feedback we receive from other parties into the business plan. So moving on to some of the detail, it's strategic plans that drive the local authority strategic plans and our regional business plan. It's our activity with directors and that two-way activity, that internal self-evaluation that takes place where the business plan reflects strategic plans, but we inform those as well, supporting the local authorities. Now, apologies for this slide. It's a little bit messy, but it's an important one to put in, and it's to reflect, and I'll cover off the individual parts of that later on, but the green elements of that slide are in the business plan and in the report our high-level strategic plan. They are influenced by, and that's last year's Monmouthshire objectives, the current one's still under construction and development, I understand, but those influence the parts and support your strategic plan through our business plan itself, and I'll unpick and explain some of the key elements in green of the strategic plan of our business plan as we go through. So the visioning sessions I've covered. It's important to realise it was a broad range of groups, key members invited to those as well. Sessions for LA directors, LA school improvement leads and senior EAS staff to inform the business plan taking place in the autumn. The key feedback from the directors and the school improvement leads and the priorities from your officers: renewal and reform on the back of emerging from COVID, clear roles and responsibilities for how we work with local authorities, a vision for recovery and practical help to support LA's share practice of what's going on in terms of the recovery, clearly shaping the future in terms of, and I'll unpick some of this later, curriculum reform and change, and continued investment in leadership, and leadership seeing as a core supporting factor for everything, and including governance in that, and the development of governance. That long-term leadership must be in place. Though that was the 5. The others, there were other groups as well. I'm not going to read all of this slide to you because they've been incorporated into the business plan, but you can see some of the feedback that we've received that from the various groups, that regional shared vision, that we're dynamic, that we look for supporting the curriculum, that we look at 3 to 18 education in the whole, empowering teachers and leaders, professional respect, ultimately a confident workforce. And it's only through the workforce in schools, as we know, that we can make the difference, and we're there to support that workforce and be flexible and supportive. So what are we aiming to achieve? And this is looking at the theory of change model, and overall looking at an overarching Southeast Wales, beyond and above EAS, but a whole wide Southeast Wales vision that all young people confident, ambitious, resilient, and that there's ongoing work across the 5 local authorities and ourselves to continue to develop that work, that vision, in terms of a strong commitment to partnership working across the region. In terms of that, we then have an EAS vision and how it contributes to that overall vision, supporting and enabling schools and education settings to thrive as effective learning organisations. And as part of this consultation process, we're evolving that vision for the business plan as well. But that's the one that exists, but is under development. So we, in our business plan, reflect that vision, have an ambition that we are supporting Wales and the Welsh ambition that all schools develop as learning organisations in keeping with the OECD principles, the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, and that schools are learning organisations that adapt more quickly, and that idea of supporting a self-improving system continues, and that we use the expertise and continue to use the expertise that exists within our region, but also where necessary outside the region as well. So in terms of how we offer the opportunities to schools, they're in 5 areas, which I'll cover on the next slide, but school improvement, leadership and teaching, the new curriculum for Wales, health, wellbeing and equity, and governors underpinning that as well. But it's then in 3 offers in a way, that we've got a universal provision that is for everyone, a number of school improvement partner days who work and support other schools, broker the support, get support from learning network schools, which you'll have heard of before, partnering up the right schools to work each other. Some of our specialist support from the centre as well will then follow in the next 2 tiers of specific and targeted support through ongoing professional discussion, those schools that need that additional level of support, and then bespoke support for those schools who really require intensive support because of circumstance, because of context, to develop and support their school improvement journey. So, for example, could be learning network schools or school-to-school partnerships that are supporting that, but heavily monitored, planned by the school improvement partners, and that school improvement partner role will continue. That role was one that changed last year, you remember, from being challenge advisors into school improvement partners and being seen as a more supportive, engaging role with schools. And as we say, sitting down alongside people and working with them rather than seeing as this external body coming in to challenge. That direction of travel has been in place for many years. So overall, the key areas, and I won't focus on every one, but school improvement, the overarching at the top, looking for the bespoke, knowing our schools is critical with our partners in the local authority, then we align the support to their needs rather than, I know it says universal, but it is not a one size fits all. The 3 critical areas overseen by my colleague assistant directors, leadership and teaching, the professional learning for all, curriculum for Wales and the development on that journey, and then health, wellbeing and equity, working very closely with our colleagues in local authorities for ALN on that area, and then underpinning it all, the support that governors need because they're critical in driving school improvement. In terms of impact, these are high-level statements. Gone, as I've said, are the days where we had level 2 thresholds and A stars and to C. Some elements of those may well return post-pandemic, but we do not know what they are in terms of Welsh Government expectations and definitions. So the impact is on the profession, and you look at all of those impact statements are about working with our partners to enable and encourage and develop change amongst our partners, because they're the ones that are directly working with learners. We will have a range throughout the process of reporting mechanisms, as we've done in the past, through JEG, our Joint Executive Group, where you're represented, and local authority scrutiny committees, where any report for JEG can be tailored to the needs of individual scrutiny committees, and we'll report back throughout that. In terms of how we capture, it is on those impact statements. So the diagram on the right, that we have service evaluation reports which have been presented to local authorities for the current business plan and will continue. They have informed our current detailed delivery plan. And please don't think that this is our only plan. This is a high-level, accessible plan that sets out our strategic objectives. This year, for example, the detailed delivery plan is something like 700 lines in Microsoft Excel that you would expect, not to that scale, but a school to be undertaking as well. The detail is being developed as we speak. There's impact capture processes which we are developing on those, so that we have a clear range, and the phrase in the business plan of stats and stories. So it's not just about the quantitative, but it's about the qualitative as well, and the positive impact stories from schools, and enabling and capturing a wide range of data on the system, which is developing, because we don't have those benchmark quarters that you'll all be familiar with of old, and then that range of the outputs are at the bottom. Some of the foundations, and I'm not going to cover all of these because you've had time to read these foundations, but I think some of the critical ones: passionately committed to Wales, helping staff and schools. one element through the pandemic that we've learned is to be agile, timely and responsive, and absolutely as well, a further supporting element, sensitive, flexible and empathetic to system needs at a time where schools now have never had pressures like this ever before, and never had them for such a sustained period of time, when we reflect that it's now coming up to almost 2 years of that. The rest are underpinning ones. I would pick on the fourth bullet from the point that we communicate clearly with all our partners is absolutely critical. So assumptions, and these assumptions can easily be turned into risks as well, and we have a risk register, as the local authority council will have a risk register as well, to check things are in place, that we operate with integrity, honesty and objectivity, that our partners in the system understand us. Professional learning has a positive impact. They're all self-evident. I'm not going to read those out for you, but we do rely on our partners and we rely on our schools, and there are tools in the local authority for encouraging schools to engage with us and the local authority as well, and encouraging governing bodies to do that. But there are those risks and mitigating steps in place, but those assumptions or risks are critical to the process. This page is a summary of what I've covered to date. I'm not going to go through this, but we have tried, instead of having a long linear document as in the past, to have a single business plan on a page, of trying almost like a placemat for those of you who are school governors in schools and know some of the practice of laying out in one place what we are about as an organisation and what we plan to do. The key is that vision overarching, and we recognise that we're a component part that contributes to that overall SE Wales vision. We're aiming to live up to our own vision in terms of supporting and enable schools and education settings to thrive as learning organisations. The bit that we're then looking for is impact, and that impact model being developed now, ready for commencement in April, that we are reporting in the right way into our own reporting structures such as JEG and Company Board, but into council's reporting structures such as select and scrutiny committees as well, on the work that we are doing. The detail, the high level detail of the 5 areas, which gives you a flavour of what we are looking to do, is in that section 4 of the business plan. I'm not going to cover all of that off, but I'm happy to take questions on any elements of it. With the consultation process ends mid-February, I think the key point there is that, you know, we have consulted already at this stage with JEG, Company Board, ARAC, which, as I always say, you have members who sit on those groups who have given us feedback as well. There is one element that I would like to touch on that's not in the PowerPoint but is in the report, and that's section 5 on the finance. And you will notice that as you know, for a number of years we have passed on efficiency savings into the process and back to councils. We maintain high delegation rates. For the number of years it's been about 94.5% delegation rate. You'll see that line 5.3 in the report. It's up to 95.5 this year, which has been a significant challenge given some of the constraints on grants and some of what we don't know about grants for next year, but we will continue to maintain that high delegation rate to schools because that's where the money has the greatest impact and where it matters. We've passed those efficiency savings back, offered those efficiency savings up in terms of indicative figures back to Monmouthshire, and you will see the decreasing contribution from the LA over the last 4 or 5 years. That continues as well. I will stop sharing, and Chair, more than happy to take any questions.
Okay, and thank you, Ed. Thanks for that very sort of clear and detailed set of PowerPoint slides that does, you know, explain the documentation that you sent out, which is obviously very detailed. I think that sort of crystallizes it, certainly for people here today. I'll take questions now then. Anybody want to come in on the EAS business plan, please? Councillor Louise Brown.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Sorry, I haven't got a hand up facility. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, go on,
sorry.
Yeah, carry on. Sorry, the hand facility doesn't appear to be operating this morning, but please carry on.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you very much for the EAS presentation. In the document itself, it obviously deals with the curriculum for Wales, and I think one of the things I was interested in is being on the SACRI and attending the WASCRA meetings. The religion, values and ethics side of the curriculum for Wales is basically going through a process at the moment, and I think in January there is expected to be published the guidance on it, and at the WASCRA meeting they said they expected SACRIs to have meetings in January and you know, to agree the syllabi in sort of the springtime for starting in September 2022. Our SACRI meetings are timed to be on the 9th of March, and wondered if we actually needed another meeting in February or something like that, and what's happened with regard to the publication of the draft. The earlier one I was concerned about because it didn't seem to include the legal obligations which the previous drafts had. And I just wondered if there was any update on that, because I'm concerned that you know, making sure that we're well aware of developments that are going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown.
Yeah, Ed, do you want to come in on that?
With SACRA, obviously we facilitate SACRA on behalf of the members of that. My colleague James Kent, who is facilitating SACRA at the moment, I will liaise with him. I will pass on your concerns about the 9th of March meeting and ask him to respond to you directly on that and the other members of SACRA.
Yeah, it's just obviously we don't know whether or not there has been. I mean, obviously there's supposed to be a guidance on it published in January, and we don't know whether or not that guidance has been published yet. Obviously, that will impact on the timetable with regard to this particular issue. Thank you.
I'll convey that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. If you could ask James Kent to contact Councillor Louise Brown, that would be great. Thanks. Anybody else want to come in and say we haven't got the hands up facility today, so I think you're gonna have to perhaps switch your camera on if you want to speak. Anybody else who wants to speak on the business plan? I don't see any other hands coming up. Councillor Groker, do you want to come in?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Well, look, obviously Ed has done an excellent job this morning because we've had one question. So I'd like to compliment you, Ed. If I was sort of scoring you in any way, I'd like to compliment you on your clarity. Certainly, it's helped today in terms of particularly some of the key points you've made about being, you know, not personally, but EAS being held to account for obviously delivery of your services, and the fact that the fundamentals don't change. I certainly liked the section where you talked about the strategic plans and the, you know, things like regional partnerships, etc., and the sort of high level discussion. And much of it, from what you say, obviously it's a self-improving system, and that's good to hear. And that both within the region, but also outside the region. And again, it's good to get a sort of cross-fertilization from other authorities. Certainly, I think the change in the school improvement partner from the challenge advisor, I think that's a good thing, and I think schools appreciate that supportive role, particularly in terms of the last 2 years, which have been very difficult, obviously for EAS, but they've been extremely difficult for schools, for serving heads and serving teachers. And I certainly like the concept now that there will be a range of outputs, that actions will be, as you say, agile, timely and responsive. And I think that will certainly help schools. I know, obviously sitting in this position as chair, that I'm involved in this consultation and this select group, but generally from picking up on the meeting this morning, I think everybody is, as there are no questions, that everybody is reasonably happy with this plan that EAS have done, and I'm grateful to you that you've certainly taken on board, I think, some of the thoughts, concerns possibly from the past, from schools and local authorities, and now incorporated it into this new vision of this strategic plan for EAS and the support that you offer to schools. So thank you very much for coming this morning and for explaining so clearly what you intend to do over the next 3 years, because obviously the next 3 years are going to be incredibly important in terms of, obviously, you know, the new Wales curriculum coming in, and also hopefully seeing an end to the COVID pandemic. So once again, thanks very much, Ed. Diolch yn fawr.
Pab, look forward to seeing you in person when possible. Thanks.
Okay, yes, I think that, you know, I'm certainly looking forward to it. I know Teams meetings are good, but I think actually meeting at County Hall in the future is going to be a plus. So thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, we'll move now then, and we move on to item 5. And I'd like to introduce now Nikki Wellington, who's Finance Officer and Accountant for CYP in Monmouthshire County Council, and she's going to take us through the additional learning needs funding formula for schools. So I'll hand over to Nikki. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. So yes, my role is Finance Manager for Children and Young People. So I just want to give you a brief introduction to the proposals that we are making to change the additional learning needs funding formula for schools, which is on page 9 of your pack, or page 1 of the reports. So just to give you a background to this, that the current formula has been in place for a number of years. It is quite rigid in the way that it operates, based on free school meals and statements, School Action Plus, which are for individual pupils or groups of pupils to receive funding to support them. The proposal that we have worked through, we've worked through with a working group, and the working group has been made up of a number of participants: head teachers, ALN coordinators, business managers from our secondary schools, and advisors from the local authority, both on the ALN and the finance side. So it's been quite a wide-ranging working group. We've also met on several occasions, and we've looked at numerous models to come to the two that we are proposing at the moment. The principles of the working group was that the funding would follow the child, and the other principle was that no school would be revealed as such, so that all the consultations, the schools has been anonymised, because the head teachers and the working group felt that they wanted to make the decision around the principal rather than around their individual schools. So you will see from the report that we are currently out on consultation for 2 proposals to change. So the first model that we are looking at is where we delegate the funding. On 70% of the funding will go on pupil numbers, and 30% will go on additional learning needs in the school. And the second model is exactly the same, but 80% on pupil numbers and 20% on additional learning needs. The working group had no preference over the two, and therefore wanted to put those 2 out for consultation. You will note from the appendix in the report and the consultation document that there are schools that will win and schools that will lose funding, and it was very clear from the working group that at no point did they want schools to lose significant amounts of funding or gain significant amounts of funding when we're implementing this model. So there is a proposal to provide transition funding over a number of years to smooth those effects. The whole model will be reviewed again in 12 months, again with the working group and with the head teachers. All head teachers have had an opportunity to see the models informally, and now obviously it is their opportunity to respond formally. The closing date for the consultation is the 11th of February, and following that it will go back to the schools budget forum for a decision as to whether we continue with the recommendation to change, and if that recommendation is agreed, it will go on to Cabinet in March for the final approval. Thank you, Chair. I'll hand over for any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. That was short and sharp and to the point, and I think we've got the certainly got the gist of it. Say we haven't got the hands up facility. It's for some reason that operational system isn't running this morning. So I think if you want to speak now, I think you're going to have to literally put your camera on and put your hand up, physically put your hand up. Joe Watkins, Councillor Joe Watkins, thanks. Come in.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nikki, for the report. I spent a good hour going through the spreadsheet and trying to understand all the funding side of things. So first of all, I would really commend you for doing this piece of work. I've spoken to head teachers and ALNCOs, and they have all been quite convinced that the system wasn't working as it was at present. So it really did need to be looked at. So that's really great. Could you give any extra explanation about the difference between the two models? That was the one I couldn't, from my point of view, not being within the system, I couldn't really work out which one we would plump for, to be perfectly honest, which one would be the best option. There seemed to be one had slightly lesser impact on the schools that would miss out than the other, but that was about as much as I could draw out from it. So can you give any extra information about that, the difference between those two models, please?
Thank you, Councillor Watkins. Yes, in essence, you are correct. The two models are very, very similar in what they are proposing. Obviously, if we went for funding on with a higher amount on pupil numbers, then obviously schools with larger pupil numbers will gain more. Whereas if we went for the 70%, they would lose slightly less funding. They would have slightly less funding. With the additional learning needs, exactly the same in terms of the number of children that have attracted funding via the old formula for additional learning needs. You are correct, as I said, the working group had no preference on these models. They just felt that they wanted to put them both out there for schools to consider. They had no preference in which one to recommend, but they were committed to the principles of the pupil numbers and additional learning needs rather than any other driver for the formula.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Councillor Martin Groker, would you like to come in, please?
Thank you, Chair. I fully understand the need for anonymity in the tables of responses here, but I wonder if it would be possible to get some comment, Nikki, on whether there is anything that can be drawn from looking at the responses of schools, whether there's any link to the size of the school in terms of the response that they made, or whether there's any delineation between secondary school responses and primary school responses. Just looking to see if either of the models have got any preferences in those sorts of sectors.
Thanks, Councillor Groker.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so in terms of the sizes of schools, then the head teachers don't know their schools, and they and that was one of the principles. And yeah, I agree. I'm sure that by looking at the pupil numbers, some head teachers will be able to work out which is their own school and the effects of that. And in fact, I know that some have been able to do that. In terms of the driving on the pupil numbers, obviously our comprehensive schools have larger pupil numbers, so we will see over the with these two models that the secondary schools will gain in terms of funding. We have seen that where smaller primaries, obviously they've got less pupil numbers, they will lose, and where schools have been very have got levels of high levels of statements and school action plus statements in place, then obviously moving away from a higher level of funding for ALN and doing it on pupil numbers and additional learning needs, and obviously these schools will lose. So that's why they were very clear that they want that transitional funding in place to allow schools to move from the old to the new model. And that will be in place for a number of years, possibly up to 3 years, to allow schools to move across, to minimise the disruption in terms of the funding and to minimise the disruption in terms of staffing, and more importantly and most importantly, minimise the disruption on the support for those pupils.
Okay, thanks, Nikki. And Councillor Maureen Powell now then, please.
Yes, I'm just going to say, I'm coming in, but I'm just going to say the hand thing is up there because both myself and Martin have got our hands on it, so probably you're not able to see it. Yeah, okay. Nikki, we've just been talking now about the schools, the different sizes of schools, depending what funding they're having. I always assumed that the funding would go with the child, so that if a school has got more children in special needs than others, they would get more money because of more children in special needs. And if that child moves somewhere else, the funding goes with them. Well, is that still going to be the case?
Thank you, Councillor Powell. In terms of the new model, the proposal is that the funding will remain in place for the whole of the financial year, which will allow the schools to have that flexibility to plan that funding for that financial year and plan the staffing. If a pupil leaves this and goes to a different school, the funding will not be moved. Under the old system, the funding would have been moved and would follow, which would result in that member of staff who was supporting that pupil being made redundant in most cases. If there is a contingency that we will hold at the local authority, so what will happen is if a family move into Monmouthshire and have children with additional learning needs entering into the school system, we will be able to provide funding on a one-off basis to bring them in, you know, to provide that support for that first financial year. But following that, of course, those children will be enrolled at the school properly and they'll be attracting funding under this new system.
Thank you very much, because that's what I was concerned about, that the teachers lose the job if there was only one child there and then they went, there'd be no need for them and they would be out on a limb. So I'm glad to see that's going to be the case now. I didn't really pick up on it exactly when you were speaking, and that's just what I wanted to make sure of. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. Thank you, Nikki, for that. We go now to Councillor Louise Brown, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a very quick question. Just wondered if you'd had any feedback on the idea of 75% and 25%, as opposed to 70% or 80% and 20% and 70% and 30%, and you know, what impact, if that happened, would occur, and whether it's been discussed by any of your responses that you'd received from schools. Thank you.
Nikki, do you want to come back?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Brown. In terms of the 25 and the 75%, that was discussed at the working group, and they felt that they would prefer the 70 or the 80, which is why we've gone out with those recommendations. In terms of feedback at the moment from schools, the consultation went out on the 10th, so it's only just gone out. I haven't had any feedback in terms of responses from schools at the moment, but I am anticipating, obviously, we will have that feedback. But as I said, you know, the working group considered it and felt that they would prefer the 70 and the 30 and the 80 and the 20%. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Nikki, for coming back on that. And I know that with percentage, you could go, you know, a large number of ways. Councillor Maggie Harris. You're on mute, Maggie. Your microphone is muted, so we can't hear you.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
I can hear you now.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, Nikki. In relation to those schools who might come under two headings, i.e. large numbers of ALN and large pupil numbers, and keeping in mind also that within the span of this plan, because you're talking about, you know, for the next few years, we will actually have a 3 through 19 school within the Monmouthshire network. Will there be any flexibility if, when the two schools are combined for the 3 through 19, how will that actually affect the numbers, and is there enough flexibility for the transition from a junior school and a senior school to the combo school actually when it goes on stream? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. Yeah, that was discussed in quite some length and detail in terms when we were at the working group level, and we are aware of the situation with the school, and hopefully with the new 3 to 19 school coming online in the near future. It is something that we would need to work through on the formula. But to be perfectly honest, this new formula, we were very keen to give the flexibility to all schools. So we know that obviously during the pilot, shall we say, for the first year when things are coming through, we need to consider all these things that are coming through and not have a closed eye to any of them, and be open to all of the things that come forward, which is why we want a full review after 12 months, so we can pick up all these issues and these concerns that schools have had. Which is, you know, I'll go back to the point for me really, which is very important, is around the transition funding to try and give the stability for schools to continue as they are. But yes, that was certainly discussed at the working group, and as we move through developing the formula, obviously all the formula will need to change for the new 3 to 19. It won't just be the additional learning needs part of it.
Right, thanks Nikki, thanks for that. Any more hands up or anybody else wanting to come in? Can I just ask briefly, Nikki, in terms of, you know, where we're at after today, you know, when our final decision's going to be made? Now, I know obviously the consultation ends on the 11th of February, but when will that final decision be made in terms of the permutation, either, you know, the 70% on pupil numbers or 80%, etc., and the actual new formula will be final? Can I just ask that, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so the process after the formula, the consultation has closed, is that the recommendations will go back to the school budget forum for consideration, and then the final decision will be made. A cabinet report will be drafted, and the final decision will be made by cabinet. I believe the meeting is on the 2nd of March this year, so there's quite a quick turnaround once the consultation has closed to get it back through to the forum and up into cabinet.
Okay, thanks. No more questions. You know, obviously, thank you very much for coming to CYP this morning to present on this, and you've obviously, you know, clarified for everybody in terms of what the models are and what the implications are. I must admit, I'm reassured by the fact that there is this transitional funding, the sort of buffer funding system, so that schools, you know, obviously the schools who gain, it's not an issue, but for schools that might be having slightly less money, that you've implied there's a 3-year transition, and that, you know, will obviously help them. I think we've clarified in terms of some of the, you know, the numbers, particularly with Martin Croker's question about the size of schools, and obviously, you know, primary as opposed to secondary. I think that's a pretty, you know, important point, and also the fact Louise Brown said about different permutations, but I think you've obviously discussed that, haven't you? And, you know, you could go any which way on splitting up 100%. Yeah. Not that I'm a huge statistician, but and also I think very important point that Maggie Harris made from MASC, we will have a new scenario now from 2024 with a 3 to 19 school, which will obviously be different and will have different needs. So I think we've been reassured by that. Are the committee happy for Nikki now for this to proceed now that we've had this clarification? And a question from Councillor Joe Brown, just clarifying things. Is the committee quite happy for this consultation now to proceed forward to the closing date 11th of Feb, and then to the cabinet report? Is anybody unhappy with that decision? don't see any hands or people shouting, so I assume that is assent. I can see some positive comments coming up, so we'll take that as it were as read, and I'm very grateful to you for coming this morning, and it's always useful to actually, I know we've read the report, but I think for everybody, for you to actually come here and explain it, it does actually help in terms of knowing what's happening. Personally, I think it's a fairer system, and it will allow schools to plan. I think at the moment, certainly from discussions I've had with yourself and with schools, heads are finding it very difficult to plan because pupils do move from one school to another, and then that means that sometimes a TA, is no longer required, but then might be required in 6 months' time when another ALN pupil comes in. So I think in terms of continuity and planning, it's much better that we've actually got the system now. And I certainly being on that forum, speaking to head teachers, they are happier with a continuous system which they can plan for, and I think that's to the good. That is a plus, and that's even, I think, speaking to somebody whose school would lose out slightly. So I do overall think it's a good plan, so we'll go ahead with that. So thanks very much for coming in this morning. Diolch yn fawr, and I'll see you at the budget forum at 4:30 this afternoon, where we'll discuss this and other issues. Thank you, Nicky.
Chair.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move now then to agenda item 6, and we're going to look at the forward work programme. And obviously we have changed slightly today. We were due to have youth offending today, but that couldn't take place. And in fact, EAS wanted to come and talk about their business plan, so that's actually worked out. So in terms of the forward work plan, the next meeting on the 31st of January, which is in effect an additional one, that will cover the budget, and County Councillor Phil Murphy, who's Cabinet Member for Resources, for Budget and Resources, will come in. But that will be a very focused session, particularly obviously on CYP, and should probably take something like an hour. And then we will then take the report from the Youth Offending Service, which will take hopefully between something like 45 and 50 minutes. And that will obviously be the meeting on the 31st. Please note as well that the meeting on the 31st is scheduled for 2 p.m. and with a pre-meeting at 1:30. So obviously it's not the usual 9:30 for pre-scrutiny and 10 for the actual meeting. The following meeting, the 3rd of March, we will be running ahead with that. County Council date has changed, and that's in the afternoon. But in the pre-meeting today, we discussed this issue, and everybody was of the opinion that we should remain with the 3rd of March at 9:30 pre-meeting, 10 o'clock full meeting. And there we will look at family support services in the first part, and then the normal budget monitoring. And then lastly, the last meeting before the end of the council session for this term on the 7th of April, ALN, additional learning needs, and the MIST project. So I hope people are fairly happy, with that. Item 7, the Cabinet and Council Work Planner, that is obviously for information. Item 8, confirm the minutes of the previous meeting. Can I have are people happy with the minutes? Will somebody move that?
I'll move that.
I'll move them, Chair.
Oh, I'll
Okay. Right, we've got people falling over each other. That's a good sign. So again, everybody happy with that those minutes are a true representation? I take that to be yes. And then final item number 9, which I've just done, Next meeting, 31st of January at 2 o'clock, pre-meeting at 1:30, and then the following meeting will be the 3rd of March, pre-meeting at 9:30, and full meeting at 10 o'clock. Well, thank you everybody this morning for your attendance at the meeting and for your contributions. And now that we've come to the end of the agenda, I formally close the meeting. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much,
Thank you,
Chair.
Chair.
Thank you, Chair.